Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Hughes. I am from a small town called White Oak. It is located in Pennsylvania. There was an article that came out on social media months back, and I joke with everyone I interact with, and I have this in all of my biographies, that White Oak was dubbed as the most boring town in the state of Pennsylvania. Well, right now, during this global crisis, I think our town and any town is anything but boring. So I don't know if it would still be considered the most boring, but as many of us are at home watching this summit today, I think we would say that many of us have felt bored. So I think just about anywhere could be dubbed a boring town since we are all trying to quarantine and stay safe and take care of our families. So, again, I am from Western Pennsylvania. In my house are several family members. Some of them have four legs. I live with my mother, whom everyone affectionately calls Mama Betty. And there's my son, Christian. He is 22 years old. He is a young adult living on the autism spectrum. And the rest of our family is fur covered. We have a Yorkie poo and we have six cats. We are a huge rescue family, and life is definitely not boring at Casa de 1931, as I like to say. So that's who I have at home with me. And a little bit more about me. I have been working in the field of behavioral health since 2001. I have been working for behavioral health providers that provide what's called applied behavior analysis. Primarily, we've worked with families impacted by autism, but we also work with children and teens impacted by behavioral health challenges and intellectual disabilities. So that's been my career for the past now, let's see, 17, 18 years. So it can be a very trying career in that there's a lot of emotion in providing family support, but it's something that allows me to give back to the families that have supported us over the years. So I consider my career a calling and not so much a job. It is a blessing to be able to support and help others. So, speaking of helping, that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about in my session today. Shu Halegra, who is a dear friend of mine, whom I love to call Mother Publisher. I'm known as Mother Fluffer, as I am her editor for many of the books, especially for her series Made to Overcome. But I'm going to be talking about caregiving and how I reinvented myself through caregiving and helping others. So, I'll talk a little bit more about my background. As I said, I do fluffing, so I am an editor and I'm also an author. I have self-published several books in collaboration with several co-authors, and I am still working on my own book telling my own story of my son's diagnosis of autism and kind of where we started and how we got through some of those initial months in access services. So that's something I am working on, and I am also working on a book to publish my father's poetry. My father passed away 10 years ago, and I promised him before he passed that he too would become a published author. So, writing is something that is a huge passion of mine, definitely one of my hobbies. Shu said to mention hobbies when we talk about ourselves, so I have to mention the writing because that's something that for me has always been therapeutic. Throughout what I'm going to be sharing with you today, I plan to simply talk to you as a storyteller. It's something that I quote in my bio that's one of my characteristics. So I haven't really prepared anything for you. I just have a couple of notes here. And I prefer to talk to you one on one. And, really, I just want to share my story. And that's something that I pride myself on, being able to tell stories to connect with people, to make people feel less alone in their journeys. And that's how I plan to speak to you today, is being completely authentic and speaking organically and just sharing with you where I have been and how I got through and where I'm at today. So, caregiving. Caregiving is something that I have done personally for, I guess, over 20 years now. So, as I said, my son, I'll start with him, he is 22 years old, and he was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. When I gave birth to Christian, I was very young. I was actually 19 years old. And my story, actually, you can find that in the Made to Overcome series in the single parenting edition that was just published. I shared my story of what it was like to be a young pregnant teen and giving birth to a baby, and, about my choice in becoming a single mother and how I got through those trying first few months within my pregnancy. And at the time that I was pregnant with Christian, I was also assisting with some caregiving of my grandparents on my mother's side. So my caregiving story kind of starts back when I was pregnant with my son at 18 years old. My parents or my grandparents were getting older and they were struggling with their health. My grandmother had been a breast cancer survivor but had struggled with other health issues aside from breast cancer. Same thing with my grandfather. He had suffered through several health issues as well. They lived about an hour from us. So there was a lot of back and forth travel to make sure that they had everything they needed so we could keep them at home as long as possible. And again, at the time, I was pregnant with my son. So fast forward, Christian was born, and again, I was a single mom, lived at home with my mom and my father, and we were trying to support my grandparents as much as we could from an hour away. So we were doing okay those first few years until their health continued to, worsen as they got older. And as Christian got older, he was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. So, on top of trying to care for my grandparents and making sure they had everything they needed and got to their appointments and got things they needed for their home when the neighbors weren't available to help, things became more and more challenging. Once Christian was diagnosed on the spectrum, of course, there were a number of challenges in addition to what I talk about in a few of my other books. I talk about our story and where we started and how Christian got his diagnosis. And it was a very traumatizing time in our lives. It was actually a very traumatizing incident that gave him the diagnosis of autism. So we were working through all of that in addition to trying to make sure that my grandparents were taken care of and also trying to procure the services that Christian needed, which included several things. It included in-home applied behavior analysis treatment. It included taking him for evaluations for occupational therapy and speech therapy and special schooling services. And it got to a point where I was no longer able to work outside the home. I was working in retail at the time as a manager, and having that back and forth schedule and unpredictable schedule just proved to be too much. And Christian's needs were great, and I could no longer work outside the home at that time. So it was a challenge. It was most certainly a challenge on me, financially, because my family took a hit. And it was a challenge physically because I was running back and forth to so many appointments and evaluations, yet still trying to make sure that my family was well taken care of. And because, my parents were getting older as well, and they weren't in, terrible health at the time, but not, as physically able as I was, I usually ended up being the one who would run out and make sure that everything was taken care of and still make sure Chris had everything he needed. So I was taking him with mom and dad back and forth to the therapy appointments and, taking care of things at my grandparents' house and, trying to figure out this new normal for myself. So several years later, my father's health took a turn for the worse. I'm trying to remember as I'm talking now if he was 8 or 9 years old. It was somewhere around that age. And my father seemed to have a really bad bout of bronchitis or pneumonia. We didn't know what it was, but he ended up going to the hospital, to the emergency room, and he ended up being admitted. So here I was trying to balance, in-home sessions plus visiting my father and making sure my grandparents were taken care of and trying to help my mother keep her sanity, right? And my own, which at the time didn't work very well. To be perfectly honest, it was very, very challenging. Within a matter of days, they said they were going to do some testing on my father, including checking for polyps. He was having a lot of bloody diarrhea at the time. Sorry for anyone who has a weak stomach. But this was happening in the hospital along with having his breathing treatments and, struggling with, the coughing and the wheezing. So they said they were going to do a colonoscopy. Fast forward 24 hours, my father is in a coma, and we're being told we have to make a family decision. We don't know what happened. We guess that he had a reaction to the sedative. We still don't know. I can tell you that my father was treated for bipolar disorder, and we believe he may have been lithium toxic at the time, but again, we don't know. We don't know what happened. But he fell into a coma for about a month, and that was a challenge in itself, trying to explain to a young child with autism that grandpa couldn't come home and that we didn't know if and when he was going to wake up. So we were thankful that they did allow him to visit, but of course Christian was very confused and couldn't understand why grandpa wasn't responding to him. And at the time we didn't even know if he was going to make it. Thank God he did. And he was sent to, after a few weeks in the hospital, he was sent to a physical rehab center to work on rehabilitating himself to the point where he could come home. But he went in to the hospital a relatively healthy man, at least as healthy as anyone could be after, having heart surgery. And he was a smoker, so that definitely affected his breathing over the years, but had never been diagnosed with anything previously. So after this physical rehab, he comes home in a wheelchair. So he goes into the hospital again, driving a vehicle, being able to go have coffee at the local restaurant and hanging out with folks, going to the store for items. Almost every day. He enjoyed going to the grocery store and walking up and down at the shopping center, and here he comes home in a wheelchair. So our caregiving did a total 360. And so now my mother and I were facing supporting my son with autism, supporting her husband who now is physically limited and in a wheelchair, and trying to get used to living at home as someone who requires a wheelchair, requires equipment in the bathroom to be able to use the toilet, requiring home care to support us to enable him to stay home. And then, of course, her parents' health was declining. So here we now have, again, a child with autism, a physically disabled adult, and two elderly people who were living, an hour away from us. My grandfather passed shortly after. And so, in talking about losses, Shu had asked us to address, what kind of losses did we see? For us over those next several years, it was loss after loss every few years. So we lost my grandfather and then my grandmother a few years later as her health declined. And then my father we lost in 2009. It was very, very difficult those last few years that my father was alive to be able to take care of him and to be able to make sure Chris had everything he needed. It was extremely challenging to try to care for my dad, and it got to the point that we could no longer care for him at home. His needs became too great. And to try to physically take care of him, it was truly to the point where we couldn't even lift him, and he could barely use the toilet anymore, which meant we had to change him in bed. And I remember at the time he was just swelling with water, and at one point he was up to 230 pounds. And it truly was to the point where my mother and I just physically could no longer do it. And, when I think back to the point that he could no longer live in his own house, it just breaks my heart thinking back to that memory. And those last few years that he was living in Kane Regional Center, he got up every day and, tried to keep a positive outlook on life. And, I still don't know, thinking back to those moments, what it was like for him being away from his home, but he understood we tried, and, we did everything we could to take care of him as long as we could ourselves. But he knew that it physically was challenging, it emotionally was challenging. Financially, we hadn't suffered any loss with caregiving because at the time he was approved for a home and community waiver, and we had folks coming in and out and he was taken to a center a few times a week. It's called Community Life. It's a program in our area that is funded by a home and community waiver in Pennsylvania. And if it weren't for those folks over those few years that he was home, we wouldn't have survived. So if there's anyone out there watching today from that program, mwah, I salute you. You did so much for our family. So a few weeks before he passed, my father had started to talk about things that, he wished he would have done in his lifetime. And a few days before he passed, we had had a conversation about writing. My father always loved writing poetry, as I mentioned earlier. And I remember having that talk with Dad where he had talked about, make sure this person gets this of mine, and make sure this person has this, make sure Christian gets this, make sure, your mother holds on to this. But something we talked about was writing, and writing was a lifelong dream of mine. And he said, I need you to write. He said, promise me that you're going to tell Christian's story, and you're going to tell all of our stories. We've been through so much as a family. And he said, I've written poetry and written stories for the past, 30, 40 years. And I want you to make sure that not only you tell your story, but, you tell mine too. And I remember squeezing his hand and telling him that I promised I would do it. So, one way I've been able to reinvent myself through all of this is to publish my stories and to talk about those really hard things. To talk about the things that sometimes we don't want to say because we fear, what is somebody going to think of me? What is someone going to think of my family? What is someone going to think of all of these labels and, the challenges we faced, and that sometimes they didn't look too pretty. They didn't look like, what today we see on social media. Sometimes people are posting things that look almost glamorous in the face of struggle. And, though we can come out on top, I'm a firm believer in that, sometimes those struggles don't always look so pretty, right? They're not always glamorous. In fact, they can be pretty downright ugly. They can be very painful. But, as I've moved on through, caring for my son and thinking back to the times that I cared for my grandparents and caring for my father, I've learned so much, and it's made me so much of a stronger person, stronger than I ever thought possible. But, it took time. So that's one thing that I advise everyone watching to do, is to give yourself time, to give yourself grace as you're caregiving for others, but just know that you can accomplish many things despite all of your struggles throughout all of the caregiving I've done over the years, which now has trickled into, my life today. My mother, as of a few months ago, has been struggling with a heart condition. So here I am after caregiving for, two grandparents and then my father and raising a child with special needs. Here we are today. Now, my mother's having some struggles. So here we are again. I'm a part of what they call that sandwich generation. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that term, but I definitely feel that to a T. I definitely feel like I'm part of that generation where, you're caring for elderly loved ones, or you're caring for your parents, but you're also trying to raise your child. As I said, my son is now 22, and he does still live at home with us, but is very self-sufficient. During this global crisis, he is an essential worker. He works for the very facility that took care of my father up until his final breath, and that is the Kane Regional Center. He's a food service worker. So he is getting up and going to work every day and providing people care and feeding them, supporting the people who, were just like my dad. And I can only imagine how grateful those people are, for his presence and for his caregiving at such a trying and difficult time. But he does help me now to take care of mom and to make sure that she has everything that she needs and gets to her appointments. And, sometimes he's helping her stand up while I'm taking her blood pressure. But, again, throughout all of this, I have continued to do my work and to do things for myself, such as writing, which again gives me such joy, and it allows me to give back in another way. I give back through my work in being a director of family support and making sure that people have the resources and the information that they need so that they can be successful. I'm able to link them to services, I'm able to link them to treatment, but I'm also able to share my story with them and let them know that they are not alone in their journey. So truly, if you're watching this and you're in my shoes, you are raising children and, maybe they don't have, a severe diagnosis, but maybe they have some sort of other challenge. I know that we all have our challenges. Maybe you're a parent of multiples, or maybe you're just a parent of one child who's now trying to work at home. If you're, blessed enough to be able to still be working right now during this pandemic, and, you're also trying to be a homeschool teacher because you're now focusing on distance learning, but you also have to cook dinner and do laundry. I think laundry is the one thing that never goes away, right? So, we're all trying to live these normal lives during very unnormal times, right? But you add in caregiving with it, and it just seems all the more overwhelming. But, throughout my time caregiving and working, I've still been able to thrive and do the things I want to do. Why is that? Because I do take the time, and please know, I'm not perfect at self-care. I'm so far from it and still working on it, and I think I'll be working on it until I am, 75, 80 years old, if I'm still blessed to be on this earth by that point. But I do take that time for myself to do the things that I need to do to take care of myself and to do things that I enjoy, writing, of course, being one of them. I also enjoy doing social media and doing posts. I enjoy blogging, which I will get to at the end when I share a little bit more about how to contact me and how to connect with me. But I do those things for myself. Going back several years back into the time where my father passed, I was diagnosed finally with an eating disorder. And I talk about my mental health struggles in some of my writing, and one of those is being diagnosed with anxiety, panic, and finally being diagnosed with an eating disorder. And I struggled with eating challenges in my youth as well. I was never diagnosed with anorexia and, or any sort of eating disorder as a teen, but I was told due to crash dieting that if I didn't change my behaviors that I was going to be hospitalized. I had had a lot of weight loss in a very short time period and was told I needed to get it together or that's it, I'm going to be hospitalized. So I was very blessed that back then from the support of family members, I was able to overcome and move forward. But those symptoms resurfaced truly under the pressure of caregiving and trying to live my life and trying to work and trying to raise my son. So I was struggling for several years after my father passed, but I was finally diagnosed years later, and I enrolled in a treatment program for myself, and I had the most amazing outpatient therapist who was seeing me weekly, and something I learned in recovery was the importance of taking care of myself, and it was something that I've struggled with my whole life, again, truly under the pressure of caregiving. Even though I was accomplishing things and enjoying an incredible career supporting families, deep down I was still struggling and I was hiding so many things, so many feelings. I was just burying them deeper and deeper and deeper, but telling myself, I'm being healthy, I'm exercising, although 2 or 3 hours of exercise a day is not healthy, right? So, it was truly through recovery that I learned that I need to take care of myself. I deserve to take care of myself, that I needed to get rid of that guilt and that blame, and I needed to stop putting everybody else before me. So in the past few years, I've really been able to focus on what do I need to do for myself. I've focused on making that time for myself every day, whether it's just taking a shower with lavender oil to try to calm myself, whether it's taking a walk and putting on my headphones and trying to tune out the world. Sometimes I'm just listening to the birds chirping and enjoying being out in nature and getting some fresh air. Sometimes I'm just reading. I do love to read nonfiction and things that are not so much self-help, but inspirational. I love reading people's stories, and I love hearing about how people have risen above their challenges. That's something that truly inspires me, is hearing the stories of others. But again, the focus on myself, getting myself the treatment I needed so I could become my best self, and knowing that it's okay to take that time for myself. If I want to go get an extra cup of coffee because that's what I need to do, then that's what I'm going to do. If I want an extra glass of wine, I'm going to have an extra glass of wine. If I want to walk for an extra 20 minutes and let the chores sit a couple minutes longer, or not return that phone call that's been waiting for me, or, not return all of those Facebook messages that are waiting for me, it's okay. Because one thing we all have to learn through caregiving is that if we are not caring for ourselves, we cannot care for somebody else, whether that's our children, whether that's our parents, whether that's our grandparents, whether that's a spouse that we're taking care of, maybe it's a sibling for you. Whomever it is, we cannot properly caregive for others until we are caring for ourselves. It is okay to take care of yourself, because once you take care of yourself, you are stronger. You have found that place in yourself that is courageous and that is brave. And not only are you able to give to others, you can also give to yourself. And when you're giving to yourself, you're able to accomplish those goals and those dreams that you have for yourself. Maybe for you, it's writing. Maybe it's creating a podcast. Maybe it's creating a home-based business. Maybe it's becoming an online teacher. There's so many opportunities, and you're able to meet those goals and dreams and capture those opportunities when you're being good to yourself. Please know that it is absolutely possible through caregiving for others, no matter how many people it is, to also meet your goals if you only care for yourself. Please know that it's okay to take that time for yourself. Please know that it's okay, and it is not selfish. I know that many of you listening to this today are feeling like, I don't have the time, or maybe there's this guilt and you feel like, I don't deserve the time. I am here to tell you, yes, you do. You absolutely deserve it. And I believe in you. I know that you can do this. I know that you can care for others, and I know that you can still reach all of your goals. And I have faith in you. So I hope you have enjoyed hearing some excerpts of my story and how I've been able to persevere through caregiving for others while also enjoying an incredible, rewarding career, being able to reach my goal of becoming a best-selling author and editor, and still being able to take that time for myself to breathe and to not feel guilty for those moments that I need to take care of myself so that I can care for others. There are a number of ways that you can reach me. You can reach me through my blog and website. It's called The Caffeinated Advocate. I don't know where my mug is. Here's my mug. So I don't know if you can see this, but it says, Mama needs some coffee. Mama always needs coffee. So that's part of my self-care, is making sure I have a good steaming cup of coffee, and it relaxes me and gives me joy. So as I've become an advocate through the years for people with autism, just like my son, and people who face mental health challenges, I dubbed myself as the Caffeinated Advocate. It just stuck. So that is the name of my blog, where I share a lot of my family's experiences, especially the experiences working in the field, or some stories about myself and or my son. So it's called The Caffeinated Advocate. It's www.thecaffeinatedadvocate.com. And you can also find me across several social media platforms. I am on Facebook. I do have a page called The Caffeinated Advocate on Facebook. You can also connect with me personally through my page, Catherine Hughes. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach me on Instagram. Again, I'm called Caffeinated Advocate. And I'm also on Pinterest, but that is more of my fun page. So if you're looking for some fun recipes or some cool outfits, or maybe some cool nail designs. Now, I don't have any nails right now. I am suffering without my nail salon, but it's in times like this we learn what's important and what's not. So can't wait to go back, but it is what it is right now. Thought you'd enjoy laugh. So you can find me on Pinterest as well. I do have an Amazon author page under my name, Catherine Hughes, and you can see all of the books that I have been a part of, all of my collaborations. I'm still working on my own. I'm hoping to release that by the end of the year. I've been a little bit delayed due to caregiving and this global crisis that we're all enduring. So I'm kind of in, work mode and survival mode at home. But I definitely hope to get back to that very soon, so I can get that out before the end of the year. So any of my books, though, that are currently out, you can find on Amazon under my author page. You can also find me through my work at Achieving True Self. You can see my logo right on my shirt here, Achieving True Self. We are an applied behavior analysis provider, and we are in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, and growing. Achieving True Self has its own website, of course, achievingtrueself.com. You can also find Achieving True Self on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on LinkedIn. And we also have just created our Instagram. We also just created a YouTube channel. Our first video is on there where you can learn more about our team and our services. So that's another way to connect with me. If you're a parent out there or a caregiver of a loved one with autism and you're looking for services, you can certainly reach out to ATS, and either myself or a member of our team will get back to you. So those are all the ways that you can connect with me. I definitely look forward to hearing from some of you. I would love to connect and hear your story. Any other advice I can give for you about caregiving, or anything in general, or if you just want to have a coffee virtual chat, since we're all mostly quarantined with the exception of essential errands right now. If you're up for a virtual chat, I'm up for it as well. So feel free to reach out to me to ask any questions or just to connect and share your story. I hope you enjoy all of the stories in the Women's Summit. I'd like to thank Shu Halegra for bringing us all together to provide us this platform to reach out to others who are struggling during this crisis, and to just remind all of us that we're all in it together, and we all have things that we're struggling with. And I keep telling people that I feel like I was struggling with many things before COVID-19 came about, and then here we are, and this is just complicating all of the other things. But again, just remember, we keep saying we're all in this together. That's absolutely true. All of us all over the world are in this fight together, and just remember that each day that we wake up, number one, is a blessing. Number two, it's another day closer to coming out on the other side. I wish all of you abundant health. I wish all of you wellness. I wish all of you happiness, and truly sending a big virtual hug to all of you watching today. And we're going to get through this. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciated the opportunity to share some of my story with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take good care.